This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, I'm Ashley Sorensen. I am back for day 4 of our Psyche Soma Psychotherapy Group meet and greet, our virtual meet and greet that we're having this week. And today we have Rikk Cavin. He's one of our, he's our veteran licensed marriage and family therapist and also our intake coordinator at Psyche Soma. So oftentimes he'll be the first person that any new clients or people interested in working with our therapists, he'll be the first point of contact for anyone interested. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist also, and a somatic experiencing practitioner in training. And I'm the founder and also a clinical supervisor at Psyche Soma. So we're in Fullerton, California, and we also offer virtual services as well. So Rikk, today we're going to learn about you, your practice, who you love supporting and helping, and have a conversation about that.
Cool. It's weird to hear that I'm the veteran here.
Yep.
It's strange to think, but I've been here for a while.
Yes, you have.
So to start off, like Ashley had said, I am a therapist here, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm also the intake coordinator. So nine times out of 10, you'll likely be calling me to be connected with another therapist, or an email will go through me. I'll be the one reaching back out. So typically I'm the one that you'll talk to on the phone, and hopefully I'm the one to welcome you into working with either myself or one of my lovely coworkers. So aside from that, I am, like I said, licensed marriage and family therapist. I love working with clients who are maybe struggling with their inner critic, feelings of shame. Typically, anxiety kind of plays a role in that as well, depression as well. That's really the, I guess, symptom of that I enjoy working with. And as far as like age range goes or anything, I do have a lot of experience working with teenagers, but I also, at this moment primarily work with young adults and adults, I guess, whatever
ones.
that means, the real ones, right? Because adolescence goes until like 30 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep. And young adulthood is like, there's overlap now. It's 18 to, I don't know, 30 something. So
yeah. Sick. That means I'm still a young adult. But
yeah.
So, but yeah, I definitely enjoy working with that that, I guess, symptom, like I had said. And typically my work with clients involves introducing coping skills to help reduce anxiety, some psychoeducation around that, a lot of focus on emotional expression and like integration, since a lot of times we're not taught how to emote and how to accept that, right? There's a lot of, I think, acceptance piece that goes on as well. I also use a lot of,
would go hand in hand with the shame and inner critic work that
yeah, definitely. Because when inner critic and shame are there, those things tend to be the loudest, right? And there's a lot of difficulty accepting the parts of us. I mean, even the parts that are good, right, pleasant, even that can be difficult when there's so much shame. So it becomes even harder to accept the parts that are unpleasant, right? Along with the coping skills and psychoeducation piece, I have been doing a lot of like externalization sort of parts work. And I feel like that's been going really well. I don't know why. I'm not a car guy at all, but for some reason the metaphors always end up being around cars. But it's like, who's driving the car, right? Is it anxiety? Is it emotions? Is it inner critic? Or however we want to label them, right? And typically that has been really helpful for people, right? Sort of determining how to navigate through those different parts of themselves and accept them, right? And allow them to have a voice when they need to, and maybe quiet them down when they're maybe not as beneficial to have around.
I kind of going along with cars, like the brake and the gas pedal. When do you kind of get things going? When do you amplify something? And when do you, when is it more important to quiet something that's toxic or harmful or not needed in that moment?
Right. It typically looks like, you know, the sort of, you know, to use an analogy, like the clown car concept, right? There's a bunch of different things in there, and like everyone's sort of fighting over the wheel or the brake or the right. And for me, I find it really fun actually to be able to talk about things or at least to give language to it with a client, right? And again, even though cars aren't my thing or even typically the client's thing, it's something universal that we understand a little bit of. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun being able to do that sort of externalization activity kind of throughout therapy with clients lately.
Yeah, I could see how helpful that could be, especially for people who have had enough experience where they internalize this message like I am all bad or I am no good. Like there's such a personal value that they place on themselves. I am worthless, you know, things like that. And when we can start breaking these different parts down a little bit, I'd imagine it makes things a little more manageable.
Right.
So that you're not with the entire psyche all at once.
Right. It's interesting because there's a video that I typically show clients that's I think I've shared it with you, the owl video. It's like an EFT video that I've found online, and it talks about inner critic, right? There's a few different ones, but the main one I show is the inner critic one. And it's interesting to experience with the client what or at least allow them to express or understand, like, hey, I relate to that. So in the video, there's the little owl that's struggling with this sort of bigger inner critic voice, and you know, it becomes so massive that it's like this demon owl with like bat wings and stuff, right? And at the end of the video, you know, he kind of shrinks back down, he talks to him, he you know, kind of puts him in his place basically. And instead of getting rid of him, the owl's like, hey, are you coming? Right? Because you don't get rid of it, right? And you just figure out how to navigate with it, right? And I think a lot of the times, even being able to have that sort of representation of it, or seeing that sort of representation, is really eye-opening for clients sometimes, right?
Yeah, a lot of times, whether like, you know, I've had the experience where I start therapy or new clients who start therapy, and there's something about ourselves or a symptom that we want to get rid of, that we want to extinguish, that we want to annihilate. And then oftentimes we find like that has been happening for so long.
Right.
That maybe that's not what is actually going to work.
Right. Well, I don't
and welcoming these parts of ourselves.
Right. While I don't have any training in it yet, I am interested in the what is it? ACT. I don't know if they say it that way or they spell it right, but that's with the acceptance piece of it. Yeah. Because I had a professor in school who used that, and he did this activity where it was, you know, on a whiteboard, like list out all these things that are going to make you stop going to your goals. So you say your goal is to go to school, right? And then you're writing all these things like money, anxiety, yada, 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 right? He filled up the board. And it's sort of, you know, in a lot of people's minds, we want to just get rid of those things. And some of those things, obviously, if they're like external factors that we don't have any control over, capitalism, yada, 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 right? It would be cool to get rid of that. But like you know, realistically, things like anxiety and the stuff that we have inside, like, you know, we can still make those goals happen despite that experience, right? Because, you know, anxiety is going to be there in some way, right? Just evolutionarily speaking, we have to have it because otherwise we're going to get eaten by a tiger, right?
It serves a wonderful purpose.
And I think
it
being
can
able to share that is important.
Yeah. It can serve a purpose and get us into a lot of trouble or hold us
Right.
back.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to have those parts, allow those parts rather, to exist in both ways, you know.
And I think that's a much more complicated, it's a more complex experience to accept these different parts, because then these different parts can be in conflict with each other and you have to wrestle with that and maybe make amends or negotiate with. That's much more complex than, you know, putting some things into the shadow or cutting things out or sweeping things under the rug and only focusing on particular parts of ourselves.
Sure, it's hard. I've realized this recently, that it's at times it's not fun doing the work, right? And not only not fun, but sometimes it's like it kind of sucks, right? Whether it's because it's difficult or just because there's a lot of maintenance, right? Something about the last training that we did kind of reminded me of that. It's like, yeah, we're gonna, like, even personally, we do this work sort of ongoing, right? And sometimes that's daunting, you know, but when there are those moments, again, both personally and with clients, that are like eye-opening or moving in some way, then it's like, oh yeah, this is why this is important too, right? This can happen, you know.
It totally can happen. I think we've seen it enough and we've probably experienced personally enough of that. And then it's also like such a privilege to be curious about these different parts within the same person.
Yeah, definitely.
For a lot of people, like, they have to just kind of make it through, and for survival reasons, they have to put things away.
Sure.
You know, so
yeah,
I just want to touch on that too, that like that to give space for it all. There's got to be safety and trust.
Yeah, definitely.
And so how do you, like, when clients are starting out with you, maybe earlier on in therapy, not that you can make people feel safe or trusting of you, but how do you create a sort of environment where there's potential for safety and trust to be built?
It's a great question because I don't know how to answer it. I feel like I think that the acceptance piece is really important. You know, I'm not judging anyone for how they're coming in, right? And and maybe this sort of kills the nuance part of it, as like this sort of you know, you want to assume that you're this real, like, philosophical therapist, but like I just straight up say it, like, there's no judgment here. I'm not here to judge you, and that's not my goal, right? Like, I honestly, it's up to them to make their own decisions, right? And whether it's something that someone else feels is a bad decision or not, right? It doesn't matter to me. I enjoy having them in session regardless of that decision, right? And I try to make that pretty clear, especially with my teen clients, because it can always be a lot harder for them to be vulnerable and feel safe in with new people, right?
So there's permission for them to make their own
Be
choices.
themselves.
Yeah, to be themselves.
Yeah. I think another way that I do that is by being myself, right? it's funny. I'm almost thinking about it now. When we came in, I don't know if you could tell, but I was buttoning my shirt, and now I'm thinking about it. I'm like, why did I put a shirt? Why did I put a? I'm like, I know I want to look good for this thing, but I was wearing a tank top today. Like, you know what I mean? I think there's a level of authenticity that needs to happen, right, for another person to trust you, right? And I don't know if that's entirely purposeful for the therapeutic piece, at least on my part. It's just who I am already, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the times in school, I felt like the important part of being a therapist is that rapport and that ability to uh, provide empathy and whatnot. And in school, it was always in my head, it was like, well, all these other things you can learn, but that thing you kind of can't, maybe not that you can't learn, but like it's probably the part that's hardest to learn. And I fortunately feel like I already have that, just character trait wise. So not to toot my own horn or anything, but yeah.
If we have any newer therapists, student therapists listening to this, what do you have any like insights or tips into how, as they're learning to become therapists themselves, how they might challenge themselves a little bit to show up a little more authentically, a little more true to themselves, so that they can help their clients feel comfortable being themselves?
I mean, I guess if they feel like they have to do, again, if they're like trying to do that purposefully, it's like keeping in mind that that's the point of it, right? That being able to do that is helpful, something that you and I have talked about before that I think applies here is even in those sessions where it isn't like groundbreaking stuff, or we're not really talking about emotions, and we're like, I mean, I can imagine it with a teenager as easiest, but like even with adults, this may happen where it's those sessions that are sort of filler, right? And I use that really loosely, but I think those are really important too, right? Just being able to interact and give someone space is huge, right? Because we don't always get that.
No.
And I feel like it fits into the same kind of atmosphere, right? Being able to provide that space for someone else and be yourself and be comfortable with yourself that way, right? Shows to them that it's okay for them to do that, right?
So
And
it's
because
like
we're always going to sort of make mistakes, in some way, and then we have the ruptures, and those are great too, right? Being able to own up to it, if we need to. I think that's all just great ways of correcting things. What is it called? I always forget what they're called, like corrective experiences, right? I feel like all of that is kind of fits into that, right?
And it's like we can do the typical therapist feelings processing, which is important, that
Sure.
we need to do that. But there's also the relational piece where maybe you're chatting about the weather, but there's something about, I mean, if you're doing that forever, like that might not be helpful, but these kind of day-to-day check-in things about everyday life I don't know, it's just as important. It's another component to the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, definitely. I think it like helps fortify the bubble, the safety bubble within therapy, right? And on top of that, if you're lucky, right, that gives you more information about the client, what their interests are, how to continue to talk to them and relate other things to them. Allows them to potentially ask you questions that obviously, if they're not super personal, that you'd be able to share so that they can, and I'm keeping this in mind for like teens again, right? Because typically they'll ask questions about certain things, right? Obviously, if it's appropriate to answer, then I think you should, right? Just so that there's not a not as much distance, right? I've talked to teen clients where their opinion ends up being this sort of like almost like, oh yeah, when I get in here, when I leave here, you like shut down and you live in your office, right? And it's sort of putting that context into like, hey, I'm a person too. I live outside in the world as well, you know. I think that's important, being able to see that piece, because maybe they don't get to experience that with other adults, or again, in the case of adults with other people, or they didn't when they were younger.
And, you know, I'm a believer that whatever comes up in session is meant to happen in that session. And
Yeah.
It's all material. It's all, like you said, information, things you're learning about your clients.
Mm-hmm.
It builds more like a relational intimacy.
Yeah.
Or a complexity, I guess. You just get to learn just more information about all these different parts of them.
Right. Well, and it's a word that I think you use a lot, is curiosity, right? You know, we want to be curious about what we're gaining for like the information that we're learning, right? And again, I don't think typically in things being as sort of rat racy as they are outside in the outside world, right, that people really get a chance to share that and or experience that curiosity with someone, right? It's funny, I'm sure one of the questions that is probably on that list is about modalities and things like that, right? And I almost feel like right now it's like, yeah, this entire conversation feels like the modality that I use, right? It's definitely very relational, definitely very curious, and yeah, there's an element of, like I said, coping skills and maybe the sort of more solution based stuff. But I think where I have found both the most joy doing and results as far as clients go is just having a very, you know, colloquial one-on-one talk, like with curiosity and again, pieces of acceptance, right? And allowing for that to exist.
Yeah, even in our therapy world, depending on the setting you're in, like you were saying earlier, that we live like in such a fast-paced go world, that there isn't a whole lot of time to reflect and look inward. Even within types of therapy that can happen, or different modalities, there can be kind of a quick
Sure.
push through it, get through this, resolve the symptom. And it sounds like even in that, you prefer and you find more joy in the slowing down, the curiosity, and kind of helping clients expand.
Yeah, definitely.
Trying to rush through something.
Right. I don't have very many. I've found the most joy in the longer, like, session and a halves, because we have the ability to just slow down. And so much so that, you know, I do this in hour and 50-minute sessions as well, but where I can sort of like, so how did that feel talking about this? I can sort of allow that exchange to happen more, or even if, you know, I like the concept of being able to ask, like, oh, so I noticed you sighed. Let's talk about that. What was that about, right? When it feels appropriate, and, you know, not like at the very end of session where, you know, hey, let's talk about this thing, but like now you have to go. But with more time and slower, calmer sessions, right, I'm able to do that more, right? And I feel like that's just even more, I guess, like you said, material options for a client to express themselves, right? Which again, most of my clients struggle with. So being able to have that pointed out in that way. Again, when it's slower and safer, and it's just great.
Yeah. And it seems like, I know you were saying earlier, it's a collaborative experience with you and your clients. I'd imagine some clients that would not work for to have an hour and a half session.
Sure.
That would probably feel like hell. Like that would just be awful, like pulling teeth. And then some people really need more time. Maybe there's a lot to process. Maybe it takes some time to connect to and have access to their experience and how they want to share that with you.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's also a good sort of, if we can call it like a supplement, if you can only have session once every 2 weeks or once every month, right? Doing it that way. Yeah, it works for some people, allows for a rapport to be built a little bit easier. Again, not that it can't be built in a 50-minute session once a month, but it definitely makes it easier to have a little bit more time, especially if there's a lot of stuff going on. Like a month or 2 weeks could be a lot of in-between time, right? A lot of stuff can come up from that. So.
And again, I know there's a bunch of different factors as to why, what might affect the frequency of sessions per month. But yeah, I think we've both experienced that, where if we're meeting more frequently, at least at the beginning with clients, people, the trust might build a little more quickly, and clients often do reach some of their goals a little more quickly. Otherwise, it kind of reenacts sort of that fast pace, like, let's just get through this checklist of what I want to talk about.
I feel like now that you mentioned that, that fits a lot of, the experience that some might have when they're experiencing things like high anxiety or stress, right? Or inner critic, that they just want I get the point of wanting a solution if it's very difficult to, very uncomfortable, right? And that's again why coping skills in the beginning, I think, is really helpful. But it can be helpful to also share, like, hey, some of this stuff doesn't go away right away, right? Maybe we can get you from a 10 to an 8 right now, but we probably can't get you to a 2 in the next week, right? And allowing that to kind of have space as well, the sort of discomfort, or maybe even expectation of what therapy is,
It's really important to go over the expectations of the people that we're working with, what they're hoping, what they're expecting from us, what they're wanting to get out of this experience.
Sure. One thing that I like to tell clients, but in mind, I think typically it's like parents, right? Is that I am not a people mechanic. I do not fix people, right? That is not my job. And I don't think that's any of our jobs, right? It doesn't really work that way.
But you will use the car metaphor.
Yeah, it's strange.
I know when you were sharing with us about common things that people struggle with that you really enjoy working with, the inner critic and shame. And I'm curious, how in session with your clients, how do you know when the inner critic starts creeping in? How do you know when people are kind of heading into these shame spirals? What might be some common clues for anyone listening to kind of pay attention
to? That's interesting. I feel like it's typically a lot of, it goes back to expectations. Expectations, maybe minimizing things, typically like how they're feeling or previous experiences of how they felt. Things like shoulds, those type of things, I feel like are very easy to notice, if we're talking as far as like them expressing it, right? I'm trying to think if there's any like physical experiences that come with like a shame spiral in session, right? Um, Typically, they'll say it actually, in my experience, or if I ask like, how are you feeling with that? Having said that, what's coming up? They'll express sadness, and just based on maybe what they're talking about, I'll ask like, what else is there? Is there shame? Is there guilt? But again, typically they'll say that outright. Like, I feel bad for having this thought, or I feel bad for having done that, or feeling this. And then there obviously there is that, not obviously, there is that small difference between guilt and shame. That shame is the like, I did this, therefore I am bad, whereas guilt is like, I did this and that was bad. Like I feel bad for it. That typically I think it's easier for people to determine if they feel guilt, but maybe aren't as open to notice because it's harder to notice, or not harder, more uncomfortable to notice that they're feeling shame.
So with guilt, the emotional response to
Mm-hmm.
a bad behavior or a hurtful behavior or something
Mm-hmm.
is, I feel bad about that, about the
Yeah.
behavior.
Yeah.
Because guilt is
I am bad because of this behavior.
like at their core, they are bad because of a
Mm-hmm.
behavior or
Mm-hmm.
a trait or something like that.
Yeah. And it can, from my experience with clients, it can be really anything. Then it hits those core beliefs like, I did this one small thing and, I'm terrible and I've always been terrible and I'm always going to be terrible, right? Just very core negative core belief, right? And like really touches upon those pieces.
What we have a couple of minutes left, and I'm
Yeah.
curious on this inner critic and shame topic. What would you say patterns or things that you notice about the roots of shame? Like for most clients, where does it typically come from? Is it really that they're horrible human beings?
No, most likely not. What I've seen a lot is, even in, I don't want to be like, well, it's the parents, right? Because it's not that simple, right? But I feel like there's a lot of experiences that people have, whether it's family of origin or sort of any sort of abuse or anything that happens that way, right? That's outside of their family's experience, that can really, cause that feeling of shame, right? And then it sort of perpetuates itself because the shame sort of sinks into the shadows, right? And it thrives in the shadows, right? And we don't typically have on our own, especially in those circumstances, a way or even maybe a want to turn the light on, right? And I think that, I'm a believer that inner critic has a role. It's there for a reason, just like anxiety and emotions, right? But a lot of the times, shame kind of gets projected through inner critic, right? That I feel bad because of what, let's say it's a negative core belief at that point, right? Well, I feel bad about this thing, therefore I'm a bad person. Therefore, inner critic has to overreact anytime really anything happens, right? Or anytime that I'm feeling some sort of anxiety, inner critic has to be like, why did you do that? You're terrible. You're the worst, right?
So it sounds like the attempt is to stop something from happening, stop the thing that might be causing some harm or some hurt or some pain. The inner critic is a protector in a lot of ways.
Inner critic, yeah, definitely is a protector in a lot of ways, but it doesn't. A metaphor that I've heard recently is, it's the difference between a gym, like a nice gym teacher and a drill sergeant, right? Inner critic, when it's overbearing, typically sounds like a drill sergeant. They're demeaning, they're, you know, they're trying to do something to motivate, or they're
Kind
trying
of like
to,
that tough love attitude.
yeah, yes, but unfortunately that typically doesn't work, you know, and we would prefer to hear the nice, you know, gym coach helping you through the thing, like being stern, but still being loving,
Yeah.
right? And
And we've
that
got
shame,
neuroscience to back
mm,
all that up.
sure, sure, totally. That shame, I think, like I said, sort of feels like it gets filtered out into or through inner critic, and um, just is difficult to deal with, you know. Um, I also feel like when we struggle to balance, incorporate, integrate our emotions, then it's, you know, there's a lot happening over here. We don't know how to deal with it. Oh my God, there's a lot of anxiety. And then, oh my God, there's a lot of anxiety. Inner critic's gonna be like, how do we deal with this? So, you know, this is saying, hey, stop that guy from existing.
Oh.
And this guy's, you know, feeling a certain way. And then in the middle, you're just like, you know, there's a lot going on, right? And typically we hear it through inner critic.
It sounds very overwhelming and like a lot of
Yeah,
chaos, a lot of noise happening.
right.
And it, you know, going back to what you were talking about earlier, providing non-judgment, curiosity, acceptance, and authenticity are these components that help quiet some things or help kind of even organize and make sense of these different moving parts.
Sure, sure. I think that piece is very helpful, and we don't really give it as much credit typically as like organization, or even you know, self-awareness to a certain extent. Obviously, it doesn't create change, but it's interesting how much even just self-awareness, you know, in a couple sessions is like, I feel really good now, and now I feel like I can continue to work through things to be more motivated to do so, right? It's just, yeah, that piece has always interested me.
Sometimes different kind of work happens once a client is feeling better and symptoms are decreasing. That's when I think a different kind of internal work can happen.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Rikk, is there anything else that you would like or anyone listening to know from our chat tonight?
Not particularly. Just thank you for watching, and I'm glad to be a part of this. And yeah, I hope whoever is watching this helps. If they need help, we'll reach out to someone, right? And if they're also therapists, just, you know, I'm glad they're watching.
Yeah, and if anyone out there wants to connect with Rikk for a consultation or to work with him in therapy, you can go to our website, psycheandsomatherapy.com, and under our therapist page, Rick's information is there.
So, and like I said, I'm the intake coordinator anyway, so you have no choice.
Unless you're on vacation or something.
Unless I'm on vacation.
It might be me or Amanda.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rikk. It was great chatting with you. Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.